Simon Cowell has seen countless auditions, but none left him as stunned as Richard Goodall's. A school janitor with a voice that could stop time, Richard transformed into an overnight sensation. But behind the glitz and applause, a darker story was waiting to be told. Now, Simon Cowell has broken his silence, addressing the rumors fans have whispered about for months. Today, we reveal what Simon has confirmed and why, beneath all the shine, the truth is unexpectedly tragic. 1,000 quiet dreams. Richard Goodall always believed his life would follow a different path. Born and raised in Terre Haute, Indiana, his days were spent quietly pushing a mop through school hallways. Music, once his greatest dream, had faded into the background, until the quiet moments of magic began to resurface. Students passing by would stop, mesmerized by his voice echoing like church bells in empty corridors. Out in the community, whispers spread that Richard had the soul of a rock legend. But despite the growing buzz, Richard kept his head down. He saw himself as just a school janitor, burdened with bills and responsibilities, leaving little time to chase dreams that felt increasingly distant. Everything changed when a short video of his performance at a school assembly went viral. Suddenly, the world discovered what the locals had known for years. Richard Goodall wasn't just a janitor, he was a singer destined for far bigger stages. Less than a week, the clip had reached over 1 million viewers, sparking disbelief and curiosity. That was when Simon Cowell first caught wind of the news. While Simon had heard many promising voices, there was something raw, pure, and vulnerable about Richard that intrigued him. Overnight, Richard's life took an unimaginable turn. Invitations from America's Got Talent flooded in, and the man who had never ventured far from his small town was suddenly flying to auditions in front of massive audiences. Yet, beneath the excitement, Richard couldn't shake the weight of his reality. He had a fiancée, Angie, waiting back home, and he carried the haunting memory of losing his first wife to cancer. His life had taught him that happiness could be fleeting, and any dream could come crashing down. When the big day finally arrived, Richard stood at the heart of AGT's grand stage, his palms sweating, his heart pounding. The bright lights nearly blinded him, and the roar of the crowd threatened to drown out everything but the microphone in his hand. Then, Simon Cowell spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Richard, you know what's special about you, but I have to be honest. I don't accept this." The audience froze, expecting rejection, but Simon's voice softened. "I don't accept this as just a performance. This, my friend, is a moment that people will talk about." And just like that, time seemed to stand still. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, until the thunderous applause filled the room. The deep breath of relief, Richard poured his heart into his rendition of Don't Stop Believin', hitting every note with unyielding passion. All 4 judges leaped to their feet, giving him a standing ovation. In that instant, it was official. The janitor from Indiana was on a collision course with destiny. Yet, he remained unaware of the dark rumors that were quietly circulating behind the scenes. The long-awaited break. In the days following his electrifying performance, social media exploded in a frenzy of excitement. Fans across the country were stunned that such depth and resonance could come from a man whose day job was cleaning floors. Video edits of Richard Goodall's audition went viral, shared thousands of times, drawing admiration from both seasoned musicians and casual listeners alike. An unprecedented move, Simon Cowell confirmed the long-standing rumors. The AGT team had been eyeing Richard for weeks, though they'd kept it under wraps. The internet buzzed with speculation. What other secrets was the AGT team hiding? Was Richard just a one-hit wonder, or did he have the chops to climb all the way to the top? For Richard, the reality was beyond comprehension. His once ordinary life, punching in, scrubbing hallways, humming quietly, had suddenly transformed. Now, it was replaced with grueling rehearsals, non-stop interviews, and endless practice sessions. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. Strangers at grocery stores stopped him, saying, "Aren't you the singing janitor?" He'd nod shyly, still adjusting to the spotlight. In quiet moments, he'd reflect on his late wife, wishing she could see him now. His fiancée, Angie, believed this was fate, the destiny Richard was born for. Even Angie could sense the unspoken weight Richard carried. He was torn between the joy of newfound success and the growing worries he hadn't expected. During late-night phone calls, Angie reassured him, "Stay focused on your voice and remember why you sing." But when the next AGT round arrived, Richard's steps onto the stage were shaky. The roar of the crowd reminded him, expectations were high. As he prepared for the judges' feedback, his mind was clouded with doubts. Had he prepared enough? Would he disappoint those who saw him as their beacon of hope? Once the music began, every doubt melted away. Richard delivered a spellbinding version of an Elton John ballad, showcasing a range and emotional depth that left everyone in awe. Simon Cowell leaned forward, and the room fell into a breathless hush. Simon's words came slowly, each one chosen for maximum impact. I've seen many contestants rise to success on this stage, but you, Richard, you're different. There's something in your story that people connect with. However, there's also something you've been holding back. The audience shifted uneasily, sensing a tension in the air. What was Simon alluding to? Online chatter spiked. Some speculated that it was Richard's financial struggles. Others wondered if he was hiding personal tragedies. Was Simon confirming rumors of hidden struggles? Not exactly, but the friction in the air was undeniable. Simon seemed to sense a shadow lurking just beneath the surface, one the public had yet to see. Backstage, Richard felt a mix of exhilaration and unease. The excitement of the competition was palpable, but there was also the unsettling feeling that something much darker was about to surface. People were calling him an overnight sensation, but the truth was far more complicated. As the weeks passed, it became clear that the applause was only half the story. The other half of Richard Goodall's story was about to crash into his life like a thunderbolt, shattering the spotlight. The cameras never caught the shadows that lingered in his eyes. To the audiences at home, Richard was the feel-good story of the year, the unassuming janitor who became a star. But as the confetti settled, whispers began circulating. Simon Cowell finally confirmed the rumors. There was an unspoken sorrow following Richard's every move. Like the rapturous standing ovations, a hidden weight clung to him backstage. The more the world celebrated his voice, the more questions about his past grew. Between AGT appearances, Richard sought solace in quiet moments. He'd sing to himself, revisiting his favorite tunes from the 1980s. Each lyric brought him back to a past he rarely discussed, one marked by love, loss, and scars that had never fully healed. His late wife's face flashed in his mind every time he stepped onto the stage. Was he honoring her memory, or was he running from the grief he'd never confronted? The producers pushed him to share more about his personal life on camera, hoping for a human interest angle that would boost ratings. Richard only offered vague hints, never fully opening up. He was grateful for the spotlight, yet wary of exposing the tangled emotions beneath his calm exterior. Public adored him, and fans flooded social media, praising how his voice had given him hope. Beneath this admiration, anxiety began to creep in, anxiety he could no longer deny. One evening, after a grueling day of rehearsals, Richard received a call from home. A close family member had fallen ill, and suddenly, the glittering prospects of his new life felt distant and surreal. Waves of guilt hit him hard. Should he abandon this newfound fame to be with his family? Angie, ever supportive, urged him to stay. The next day, he pushed aside his worries as he prepared for another AGT performance. Cameras zoomed in as he stepped under the bright lights, ready to deliver another emotional show. This time, Richard sang a haunting rendition of a classic power ballad, his voice trembling with raw sincerity. Judges praised him, calling his vocals unforgettable. But Simon Cowell, arms crossed, asked the one question that would stop him in his tracks. Richard, where do you really want this to lead? You have everything it takes to succeed, but I'm sensing hesitation. Why? Richard froze for a split second. 1,000 conflicting emotions surged within him, leaving him unsure of how to respond. He wanted to seize the moment, to speak out and explain it all, but something locked his throat shut. Crowd buzzed with anticipation, waiting for him to say something, anything. As the tension built, a stagehand rushed forward, and the segment ended abruptly for a commercial break. Backstage, the rumor mill churned. Critics whispered that Richard was buckling under the weight of sudden fame. Some speculated he carried a secret so painful that any further success would feel impossible. While the world clung to his uplifting story, Richard was slowly unraveling. The more the spotlight shone on him, the more the weight of his past pressed in. And soon, that unraveling would collide head-on with a bitter reality. It's heartbreaking how success and tragedy can dance so closely together. Back home in Terre Haute, the excitement surrounding Richard's rise reached new heights. Old neighbors hosted watch parties, waving homemade signs every time he stepped on stage. Local news stations hailed him as the pride of their small community, celebrating each AGT round he survived. For a man who had once felt invisible, this outpouring of support was touching. Yet oddly, it intensified his internal conflict. How could he fulfill everyone's expectations when he himself felt so unsteady? By now, reporters were camped outside his childhood home, digging for details of his past. One journalist uncovered that Richard had once been part of a local band, though he rarely spoke of it. Another reporter found traces of financial struggles, possibly linked to medical bills for his late wife. The tabloids splattered pieces of his life across their pages. Janitor's hidden debt. School hero has sad secret. Simon Cowell confirms rumors of turmoil. The headlines were sensational, but the heartache they hinted at felt all too real. During a video call with Angie, Richard finally let slip a weariness he couldn't hide. "Everyone expects me to be happy, I should be, right? But so much is undone." He feared that trying to please both the judges and his hometown was becoming more of a burden than a blessing. If he walked away from AGT, he would disappoint everyone. But if he kept pushing forward, he risked cracking under the weight of grief that had never fully healed. Meanwhile, Simon Cowell kept a watchful eye. He recognized the signs. Contestants with extraordinary gifts often carry deep emotional struggles. Off camera, Simon pulled Richard aside in a dressing room, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. "There's no shame in vulnerability," Simon said softly. "But you need to know what you really want, fame or peace. Sometimes, you can't have both." Richard turned away, fighting back tears. No matter how gently Simon had spoken, the words stung. Back in his hometown, community members began voicing their concerns. A beloved teacher from Richard's middle school spoke in an interview. "He's always been a humble guy. I just hope all this pressure isn't pushing him to a breaking point." Online fan groups buzzed with worries, some pointing to Richard's visible tension during performances, while others insisted he was simply overwhelmed by the excitement. The speculation grew when he missed a scheduled press appearance, citing exhaustion. Still, he advanced round after round. The judges continued lavishing him with praise, and social media erupted with cheers for #TeamRichard. It seemed that the more distant and anxious he became, the more people loved his story. Everyone wanted to see him triumph, yet nobody fully understood the fragility that lay beneath his calm exterior. As the days passed, an unspoken dread settled over Richard, tightening around his heart like a noose. The date for the AGT semi-finals loomed large. The entire town was counting on him to make it. Richard found himself torn between his dreams and the desperate need to confront his grief. So far, his journey had been fueled by public adoration. But now, he felt that path leading him to a crossroads he couldn't avoid. Semi-finals night arrived with a burst of neon lights and thunderous cheers. Richard stood backstage in a quiet corner, cradling the microphone like it was a lifeline. He thought about the people on his phone, Angie, his late wife's sister, his middle school principal, and how each one represented a piece of his fragile world. If he reached the finals, his life might change forever. If he failed, he'd still be the janitor with the golden voice. But could he ever go back to normalcy? As he stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted, cameras zooming in on his anxious but determined face. Richard inhaled deeply, then began singing a stripped-down version of a classic 70s hit, his voice trembling with raw emotion. Halfway through, he paused unexpectedly. His eyes glistened, his voice cracked, and the music wavered. The crowd leaned in, unsure if he'd recover. Then, with a final surge of strength, he pushed through the remaining verses, and the auditorium erupted in applause. As the lights dimmed, Simon Cowell broke the silence. "Richard, it's time we address something the world's been guessing about. There have been rumors. Everyone's talking, but I'm going to say it." Simon's voice cut through the tension. "You're carrying an immense burden, and I think part of you is afraid that moving forward means forgetting your past." All eyes locked onto Richard as a deep silence fell over the room. Able to respond, Richard nodded slowly, tears falling silently onto the stage floor. Simon took a measured breath, his voice soft but firm. "I want to see you shine, Richard, but if you can't find closure, fame will devour you. You know that, right?" Richard nodded again, barely able to speak, his throat tight. Meanwhile, the online audience exploded with reactions. Confirms rumors was trending, and the world was trying to make sense of Simon's words. Everyone interpreted Simon's statement differently, but one sentiment rose above the noise. "It's so sad to see a man so gifted stand at the brink of emotional collapse." After the show, producers and friends swarmed around Richard, suggesting he open up about his past for a special segment. Others insisted he just needed rest. But Richard slipped away from the chaos, finding solace in a small, quiet dressing room. He buried his face in his hands. The weight of unspoken grief had finally broken through the surface. This was the moment he feared most, the raw vulnerability that he had no idea how to handle. As the backstage frenzy continued, Richard overheard anxious conversations among the crew. Will he be stable enough for the finals? Can he handle a record deal if he wins? The gossip only fueled his panic. He grabbed his phone, retreating deeper into the labyrinth of corridors. Behind a stack of equipment, he allowed himself to sob uncontrollably. In front of millions, Richard had just delivered a performance filled with fragile hope. But deep inside, a gnawing realization took root. Something had to give. Either he faced his past, or he risked losing himself completely. Stage, once a dream, now felt like a battlefield. Richard feared he was losing the war. Barely an hour after his emotional performance, Richard found himself cornered by a reporter backstage, microphone in hand. The camera's glare was relentless, and the questions grew more invasive. Richard hesitated, torn between his natural instinct for privacy and the growing need to release the burden he'd carried for so long. Hailing softly, he made a sudden decision. With a shaky voice, he confessed, "I lost my first wife to cancer. I never wanted to use my pain as a publicity tool," he murmured, his words barely audible. "But the truth is, I've been drowning." That single revelation spread through social media in seconds, with comments praising Richard's courage and others mourning the weight he had carried in silence. Simon Cowell was the first to speak publicly, acknowledging that Richard's gift was overshadowed by the emotional burden he'd been carrying. Letting that out might be his only chance to heal, Simon said, confirming what many had suspected. Back in Terre Haute, Angie tearfully told reporters, "I've always known what he's been carrying. Just hoped the world would see him for more than his tragedy." Friends rallied around him, offering love and support, but Richard still felt hollow inside. Despite producers' suggestions to turn his grief into spectacle for the finals, he recoiled. Being open doesn't mean dishonoring her memory, Angie reminded him, reassuring him that this was for himself, not the world. In a quiet moment, Richard confessed, "I don't regret it. But sometimes, the things you gain don't feel like enough to fill the emptiness inside." He had become a symbol of resilience, but at his core, he was still a man trying to heal. As Angie stood by, Richard realized his story was not about fame, but about confronting grief that would never disappear. His Instagram post reached countless people, with fans and strangers sharing their own stories of loss. As media requests piled up, the pressure to maintain a brave face began to weigh heavily on him. "Maybe I'll go back to Terre Haute, teach music," he said during a quiet dinner with Angie. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Angie's reassurance grounded him. "Whatever you decide, you're not alone." Richard nodded, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. Success had come at an emotional cost, and he wasn't sure how to reconcile it. The following week, Simon Cowell reached out to discuss Richard's future. Richard, reflecting on his choices, was no longer sure if chasing fame was the right path. In Simon's office, Simon said, "You have a gift. You can make music, help people, and find peace in your own way. You don't have to do it the way others expect." Richard absorbed Simon's words, responding, "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next." When Simon asked what he had decided, Richard replied, "I don't know yet, but I'll take it one step at a time." That night, Richard reflected on his late wife, Angie, and his past life. He realized that while everything had changed, he was still the same man, trying to move forward one breath at a time. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that he didn't need all the answers. As Richard's post circulated, the support from fans and his community helped him feel less alone. The viral post sparked important conversations about mental health and the pressure of fame, revealing the hidden struggles behind success. Despite the confetti and victory of the finale, Richard's inner quietness had transformed. No longer burdened by a secret, he found peace in his authenticity. While the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. He no longer had to pretend. The applause now felt like the sound of a man learning to carry his pain with dignity, turning the spotlight into a space for healing.